Welcome to the sixth episode of the Sabiha Khan Show. Today we have a mega whale of the NFT space, Schmrypto with us. Schmrypto is an NFT whale, an art collector, a Web3 investor, and an executive producer of the Mallary Project. He's also invested in a lot of new and good projects like Checks, Detritus, and has also started his own project, Schmrypto. I'm pretty excited to talk to you, Schmrypto. How are you doing today?
I'm doing good. You?
As I said, this is my first time talking to an art collector, and today we have a very specific subject, which is Robert Mallary. So Robert Mallary I was not aware of this artist, and one day I was just scrolling Twitter and I just saw that you have tweeted about him, about some of his art, and then I got interested. I did some Google searches, and I was blown away by this man, because Robert Mallary is an artist whose medium was tech, right? He was, I think, one of the earliest generative artists, and he was using computers in 1968. That is mind blowing. So of course, you have been into Mallary for more than a year and a half. So how about you tell us about who Robert Mallary is?
Yeah, absolutely. He's an American artist born in California in 1917. And he was trained from a pretty young age as an oil painter. Did a little bit of light sculpture, drawing, things like that. Really a prodigy. We have pieces when he was 8 years old that are really, really well executed. And as he kind of matured as an artist, he departed to Mexico City to study with the Mexican muralist Siqueiros down there. And his real interest in Siqueiros was not so much the murals themselves, but the application of the high-tech paints and equipments for applying them, and the idea that you could produce art from industrial materials was really what the big inspiration he left with. He also worked with a lot of prominent printers while he was down there as well, and returned to America, originally to New Mexico, where he did a lot of kind of landscape inspired, really work in all different medium, but sculpture and drawings primarily. And then in the late 60s, as mentioned, pivoted to digital as a primary medium, which at the time was really considered more of a retirement. The narrative at the time was, oh, Bob used to be an artist, but now he just plays with computers. And it's really only recently that the early generative work has come to be appreciated in the last few years. So it's really been fascinating getting to be a part of that and learning about that on such a crash course, because my background is as an oil painter and gallery artist originally, and so it's been pretty informative and frankly transformative. I'm a very different artist now for having been so immersed in this guy's work. It's great stuff. Like you observed, just a very talented artist.
Yeah, I mean, somebody who started with murals and paintings, and he's been in oil painting. He's used he's sketched with pencils, and then of course his Neo-Dada, the junk art era, where he's using industrial material like resins and tuxedo. I think my favorite era of Robert Mallary is definitely the tuxedo one, because I think there he was in his creative genre where he was expressing himself very boldly. And then after that, he kind of pivoted to computers, and then that man is using stereoscopic lights to generate art. He's creating a new medium. I mean, I would definitely say that he was a pioneer. He was a very visionary artist, and what Mallary has been, he has kind of worked in such a variety of mediums, and the way he flows from one medium to another, I mean, that is something spectacular. And then, so when I was researching about him, I kind of found that he was first into photography. Like he got into photography and assemblage. Like he was manipulating photographs. The barn story. So he found a barn and then he took photographs of it and he was manipulating it. And I think from there he started like gravitating towards computers. And he was also teaching at an institute where they had computers. So and then all of this is happening in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. And then magically, like one day, you find out about the, like you find a container that has a lot of unrecorded art. Like nobody knows about it. It's undocumented, untouched. So that's fascinating to me. Like tell us more about how did you find Robert Mallary?
Yeah, so when he passed away in 1997, he was 80, 79 or 80, I forget, but he had left all of his work in a barn in Connecticut, and it remained there for nearly 20 years, or actually a little more than, sorry, 21 or 2 years actually, at which point the family took all the art and put it into a shipping container, 2 shipping containers rather. All the generative art went into 1 shipping container, and a monumental piece called Cliffhangers was broken down and put into the other. And that was done so they could, sell the property and kind of process it all. And it was about 2 years after that that I was having a conversation with one of my business partners and mentioned to him the God Mode sale, which was the sale of a Fidenza for $8 million that the guy had minted for, I think at most like $200 a few months before. And he said something to the effect of, "Oh, so generative art's worth money now. I think I know where there's a shipping container full of that." And I was stunned. So we hunted down the shipping container, and sure enough, it was packed front to back, side to side, top to bottom, with mostly by volume, actually, trash and assemblage and sculptural work, but by number, hugely predominantly the generative stuff, because it just takes up very little room. It's flat packed paper,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, many thousands of pieces, as well as all the code, documentation for everything. He was a bit of a pack rat. He saved everything seemingly from when he was a very small child. And so we have a lot of work from when he was a kid. We have work and documentation all the way through, all of his notes. He just saved everything. And he had more sales than Van Gogh, but he kept a lot of work. There's a large proportion of his stuff was unsold when he passed. What did sell, though, sold to the right people. The Rockefellers collected his work in a big way. A lot of institutions hold Mallory's, the MoMA,
Yeah.
the Victoria and Albert. Lots and lots of major institutions have pieces. They're in storage largely, and largely they are the trash and assemblage stuff, not the generative stuff. Very little of the generative stuff made its way into any institutions. The only exception I know of is the Victoria and Albert has a few plotters, and the Tate has Quad 3, which is a 3D print. But otherwise, what the museums hold seems to largely be all trash and assemblage work. There's actually kind of a funny story about that in relation to the tuxedos. Nelson Rockefeller collected the tuxedos. He was governor of New York at the time, and the governor's mansion caught fire, and a lot of art got burned up. And in the process of hauling all the art out, the workman grabbed one of the Mallary tuxedos, assuming it had been burned. Just they look like they've been in a fire to start with. So it found its way out into the yard, and Rockefeller had to come out and say, no, that's not trash. That's what it's supposed to look like, because they're pretty wild pieces. They do look like they've been burned up in a fire. They're kind of hard to picture if people haven't seen them.
I mean, yeah, if like so we should So of course, like I've heard, like I've not been into the art scene for very long, and my sister is an artist, but I kind of am in more into marketing side. I'm getting a degree in finance, which is equivalent to CPA in the USA. So, but then I got married. I halted my degree, got into NFTs. But as I entered into NFTs, as like I saw a lot of art, like, and I made friends with like a lot of artists, and I kind of realized that art is like not only supposed to be pretty. Like that's like the least. That's like the last thing an artist wants. Like the art to look like pretty. Of course, it has to be like aesthetic. And Mallary has such a different aesthetic. And when I heard when I saw that video on Vimeo by Golit, uh, and because I think he was uh, alive when he did that, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and when he talks about his art himself, he kind of mentions that everything is a system. There's a composition, and then there's subsystems into systems. So it was he put a lot of thought into his art, and for him everything was structured. And when you see cliffhangers, or when you see the tuxedo out of it, after you read about him, after you kind of understand him, then you start understanding that junk art era, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's a perfect artist to kind of come to grips with all that stuff, because um, he is into programs and systems, and it was 100% about intent for him. And so I find him to be one of the more approachable trash and assemblage guys, because a lot of it's just like, oh, it's a crush can, why should I care? But there's a lot of intent behind Bob's work, and some of it gets really sculptural. Like some of them are big pieces that have a lot of work put into them, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there is the occasional crushed can. You know?
Yeah.
It's such a different, and it's such a contrast to his computer practice. You know, the bright, colorful, fairly ordered computer practice, and then chunks of barnwood glued and nailed together, which there was a lot of that stuff in the container as well. You know, we have a lot of tuxedos, we have a lot of bronzed trash. That was a big part of his practice. The resin and the bronze work both kind of came from the same place, in that he was interested in capturing stuff that would normally just be allowed to rot and go away, and making it as permanent as possible. And so when he was doing those tuxedos and those resins, he was doing that because he had been told that those resins would be chemically stable for 1,000 years. They proved not to be. That type of resin ends up getting very brittle. And so they're kind of a pain to handle, the tuxedos carefully. And
Of course,
so
like
when he
you have
began to
handled,
realize,
sorry to cut you off.
oh yeah,
Like,
no,
of course, you would know because you actually touched them, right?
yeah, they're
Yeah.
very delicate things. I mean, I say that they have a steel frame generally. So for what they actually are, like structurally, there's a light steel frame, and then the tuxedo would be dipped in resin and kind of stretched over that frame. And what he's playing with there, kind of the primary level, is this thing a figure or not? He wanted you and a friend to kind of stand in the gallery, and for one person to go, well, obviously that's a person. The other person goes, no, it's not. And if too many people saw the person, then it needed to be more abstract. If nobody saw the person, then it needed to be less abstract. He was kind of playing with that line of when does something become a figure, and that's really what the tuxedos are part of. And a lot of his plotter practice as well, it kind of plays with that same line of when does something become a figure.
And because, the way you said that, he has kind of saved everything, like all his research work, all his trash, all his art. And I think, and of course, because in a lot of interviews, he has kind of mentioned that he wanted to be a pioneer, like he said it aloud. And I think he was waiting to be found out by the right person, because he knew how like phenomenal he was and how ahead of his time he was. And I think it was destiny that you found him, and in a place in your life when you were into Web3, right? NFTs and blockchain and crypto and just decentralization. And when art is, of course, and he is found at a place in the modern times where we are at the pivot of what modern art is going to be, or art is going to be, right? Like, how do you
Yeah,
feel about that?
very
Like,
pivotal time. Yeah, he and part of his confidence was because he had done it before. As when he was practicing with trash and assemblage and doing the resin work, he rose to very real fame. I mean, he toured, he did shows in England and Germany, and he was really one of the most famous artists in the world for a moment there. And then the resins poisoned him, and he couldn't work with them anymore, and so he had to pivot completely to the digital stuff. And so I think part of it for him was just like, well, I did it once, I can do it again. And he was just going to make everybody understand why what he was doing was important. And that's why there's so much of that work, is it was never like, it's never shy. He just produces and produces and produces, and he does it with this confidence that what he's doing is art, period. And whether that be a crushed can or a piece that took thousands of hours like Quad, and then it was all kind of equivalently art to him, which is kind of an interesting part of his practice. And it's been, really something going through all of it. It's
yeah,
we
like
had some idea what we were getting to. Yeah.
Like he wrote like an influential article, "The Air of Art is Poison," and he kind of talks about the hazards of using industrial material and resins and plastics because it was infecting, I think, his liver. Yeah, if I'm not wrong. So he was, and that, so, and also like, it's very interesting that I've read some of his interviews, which were self-interviews, like, and then he's asking himself questions and he's answering them, and he kind of wanted that was fascinating to me. Like, who does that? I mean,
yeah, it's such an odd practice, and it starts pretty young. Like he starts giving the self interviews pretty early on, and yeah, he was pretty explicit about it. He said other people ask the wrong questions, so if you want to interview me, I have to be allowed to be both sides. Which is
such an interesting person. Also, like, he was very vocal about his likes and dislikes of whatever was going in the art scene. He's not shy of giving his opinion. Like, he did not like pop art. I think he did not like it at all, and he has criticized it, but also kind of appreciated that pop art is going to stay in the in the history of progression of art, right? And he has given some interviews. He's been called stuffy. He's kind of very okay with it. And so okay, I wanted to ask this question a little later, but because we are talking about pop art, because we are in an era where AI has kind of taken over, generative art has been, of course, like, we have been seeing generative art from a lot of artists, but then now we have AI, right? A tool where you just put in a bunch of words, right? You just put in some instructions and then you get art. I'm not sure about like how Mallary would feel about it. Like, of course, he would be like ecstatic and stuff like that, because of course this is using computers and softwares and art, which was his dream. And now but also he criticized pop art because it lacks substance. So, and you have started an AI project, like an AI art project called Schmrypto, and you collect AI art, and you yourself are like an artist. So what's your view on that? Like,
I think AI art kind of teaches a similar lesson to what pop art does, which is that it was never really about the image. it's kind of the primary original takeaway from checks is it's not about the image, it's about the idea represented by the image and the provenance of the piece attached to that idea. Like that's the core kind of function of the art market. And pop art lays that bare by saying, look, here's this print of this thing that we all kind of take for granted as a label on a can or and in this different context with the correct provenance, it's now worth all this money or worthy of being placed next to this classical painting. And that's kind of the idea, to my mind anyway, behind the primary operating idea behind pop art. And trash and assemblage art almost takes that a little further. It says, this thing doesn't even have value in a public context, whereas the Coca-Cola label may be taken for granted individually as something that's just attached to a can that we throw away, but the can that we throw away is really genuinely neglected by and not valued by society. And then you take it and put it in this different context and ensure the provenance, and suddenly it's an item of art. And it's an interesting exploration of that. And in the same way that pop art and trash and assemblage art that are done without intent or without some sort of underlying message to communicate is just meaningless and usually falls on its face, the same thing holds true for AI. Like AI that doesn't have an interesting context or an interesting message, it doesn't matter how good the picture is. And so I don't think it really changes anything in that regard. And I think the limiting factor was already attention, that people are already completely inundated and at 100%. And so you're already kind of jostling for bandwidth. And AI doesn't really change that. There's already too much media. Now there will just be even more too much media. And so it'll be interesting to see. I think it'll be transformative, but not necessarily in the ways that we expect, that it won't necessarily change what it means to be an artist or what the art market looks like at the end of the day. It necessitates the introduction of NFTs. I think it's not a coincidence that we've seen the two rise at the same time, that like NFTs make way more sense with a body of art that requires digital authentication, and digital art is a tradable good, which is all AI art is ever going to be. I take that back. Somebody will make AI that outputs marble sculptures and things like that you can trade on the traditional art market, but in its kind of nascent period, it's all digital. So you need an authentication and provenance system for that, and NFTs are that. And so this symbiotic relationship between AI and the NFT space, I think it's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger. And I think given Bob's practice with trash art, he would probably eat it up. I think his practice in trash and assemblage suggests that he would really get a kick out of zero marginal cost art, and like you said, he'd be very critical of a lot of it. I'm sure he was a pretty openly critical person, but I think as a movement, he would be right there with everybody else, because that was always kind of the case with him. As soon as he got into digital art, it wasn't the case that he started doing plotters in the 60s and then just did plotters for the rest of his life. No, he did plotters when plotters were the cutting edge. He pivoted to producing art on an Atari at one point, and it's really beautiful stuff. It's got this kind of knit textile quality to it due to the resolution and the way the images were produced. And then as soon as Photoshop was an option, he was using Photoshop really extensively. And then late in life, he kind of brought the trash and assemblage practice back in. And like you said, he'd find the old barns and the old wood in the forests and take pictures of that and then manipulate those images in Photoshop. So he kind of brought it back full circle and incorporated the latest computer technology into his practice from really the 40s is when that was prominent in his practice, before the end of his life. But towards the end of his life, he had really returned to trash and assemblage a lot, but was then playing with it in Photoshop. So, I suspect if he had made it to 124 years old, no, he wouldn't be quite that old, but if he'd made it to 100, I'm sure he'd be minting NFTs and playing with AI and right there with us on it. That's part of what excites me about finding his collection. Is a lot of artists, they just don't have any meaningful relationship with what's going on here, but Bob really foresaw a lot of what's going on here. So it makes it a lot easier to want to try to bring this stuff onto the blockchain and into the modern age, because I think it belongs here in a way a lot of his contemporaries don't.
Yeah, I think maybe he was an artist of this century. Like, yeah, he was kind of, because he says that he is a classic. He has a Catholic taste. He kind of respects history a lot, and he admires perfection in art. And whenever it was like found, I think you're very right about. Of course, he would be trying a lot of AI art, and he would be criticizing a lot of it. And I think he would then take it to wherever we're going with technology. So coming back to the barn story, to the container story. So you found 2 containers, you opened it up, and then you find this huge, like, pile, you find like huge piles and piles of Robert Mallary's art. How do you feel about it? Like
it was pretty surreal, because we went out there expecting a lot. I mean, you don't get a shipping container to put a few pieces in there, so we expected a lot, but it was just such a huge quantity of work. And not just that, but it was in flawless condition. Like, at least the computer stuff. The trash and assemblage, it's hard to say really what condition it's in, because it looks damaged to start with. So it's genuinely not easy to say with some of that stuff what condition it's in. But the plotters are, by and large, I mean, borderline flawless. There are exceptions. There are some with water damage. There are some that were framed that have faded. There's some that aren't in perfect condition. They're almost kind of interesting in the contrast to the others. But yeah, generally speaking, they are really in surprisingly good shape. And so and then in addition to that, the code being present, to my mind, having the code that produced the art is almost as interesting as the art in a lot of ways. And so it was just everything we could have hoped it could be, frankly. I don't know how it could have been much better. And then the other shipping container had cliffhangers in it, which was the centerpiece of the 1964 pavilion at the New York World Fair, the New York Pavilion at the 1964 New York World's Fair. Philip Johnson was a kind of the architect of that time, and he was commissioned to assemble and commission art for the fair. And people visiting the kind of early draft of the fair, as it were, came away really upbeat and happy. And so he commissioned cliffhangers to kind of remind people that the Cold War was still on and bring the mood down a little bit. And it's a amazing piece. It's a bunch of a dozen or so of his tuxedo pieces suspended from a ladder, and the ladder would latch horizontally to the wall. That ladder is one of the few things that we don't have, but what I do have is the receipt from the workman that he hired to go collect that piece off the side of the building. And he notes at the bottom that the ladder wouldn't fit in his truck, so he cut it in half and threw it in a dumpster. So we have the rest of it. I have exact dimensions for the ladder, though, because again, Bob kept everything. So we have the plans to the ladder down to the millimeter, so we can reproduce it if we need to.
That is something. It just blows my mind. Like, this person is just immaculate, and like he's just writing everything down, and I don't know, maybe
so thorough.
That's so amazing. Like, you could actually reproduce that ladder, and it just boggles my mind. Also, like, it looks like a story because I've seen like a lot of shows in which they kind of have these mysterious shipping containers, and then they open it up. Sometimes you find trash. Sometimes you're like very lucky. Sometimes you get like limited edition sneakers and stuff like that. And you're getting art of this underappreciated artist of the 20th century. And it's just, wow. Like, also like a person who has created a 3D sculpture out of a computer by a software called Tran2, which he designed himself. Like, let's talk about the quads, because I think quads like he's very famous because of the quads.
Yeah, those are probably my favorite of the computer outputs for sure. And they're the first. They're actually his very first computer outputs. They predate the rest of the work, which is funny because they're so sophisticated and complex and high effort compared to a plotter, which is not to say that a plotter is low effort. Plotters were a lot of work too. But so the Tran program takes two profiles. You draw a front profile and a side profile, and then the Tran program produces a large number of coordinates based on those profiles, and then produces a curved three-dimensional surface that matches all of those points. And then it spits out a bunch of ovals that represent cross sections of that shape. So, like when a CT scan is taken and you see the slices of the body, it slices the figure in that way. And then you take those ovals and you project them onto whatever material you want to create your 3D figure in. You cut the ovals out, you stack the discs up, and what results is a 3D figure produced by a program. And it is, as far as we can tell, it's the first computational sculpture and arguably the first 3D printing. You know, I could see how somebody could say, well, you had to cut it out yourself and stack it. And it's like, well, yeah, it's definitely human intermediated 3D printing though. It's the same principle. And
so
yeah.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say, you know, I don't know that there's no examples of anyone building something out of slices before that. I'm sure somebody had that thought, but it seems to be the first time that somebody used a computer to design a additively produced sculpture like that. So it's a pretty fascinating piece. And we have what's called Quad 2, which is 8 feet tall and made of wood. It's pretty spectacular. And I recently commissioned a copy to be made of it. That's actually should be delivered on Friday.
Wow.
And yeah, it's so cool too. It came out perfect. And I did that because it's so hard to explain to people really how quad was made, and it's so hard to visualize. And so I had it reproduced, not by exactly the same technique, because we didn't have access to the same computer systems. We actually do hope to make quads in the future that are entirely derived from cards and produced according to the original technique. But the point of this one was to show people roughly how they're assembled and to have a copy for taking to exhibitions and things like that. And we're also going to have a show in the beginning of July. If anyone's in the New York area listening to this, at Pioneer Works, July 9th, we're going to have a show that'll feature both the quad sculptures. And it'll be the first time anyone's tried to show quad since 1969, or this quad. Quad 3 is actually on permanent display at the Tate. But this will be the first time that this quad has been displayed or attempted to be displayed since 1969. And that show is actually capable due to Riot.
They're displaying Quad 2 and his copy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And its copy.
Yeah, Quad 2 and its copy. We've made a little short film about the process and the piece, and we'll, hang some plotters as well at that time. And yeah, it should be a fun little show. And so that's about a month from now. Looking forward to that. Pioneer Works is run by an artist called Dustin Yellen, and Dustin Yellen was always a big artistic inspiration of mine, so it's cool to get to work with them.
Amazing. I mean, I was going through Mallary.io. I think that's the Instagram for. Yeah, so I was going through the Instagram and I saw like an artist. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name, and he was kind of sculpting or maybe like perfecting the quad, and I did not know it was a copy of Quad 2.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, I mean, from what I have understood, like how he made quads from trend 2, he kind of made contours in the, so I'm just trying to explain it in like a very simple language. So of maybe like of what I have understood of quads, that he has designed contours on axis in the computer program, and the way you explain, like it's like a CD scan, and then he took those from that he has like cut out pieces of wood. I think quad 1 was wood, right?
Quad
Quad
one was
1 was,
plastic. One is
yeah, sorry,
plastic, 2
sorry,
and 3
yeah.
are wood, and then yeah, 4 is marble.
Yeah, so he's kind of, sorry, it was plastic, and then he's like made these slices, and then he has like stacked those slices and formed them, and then there you have the first, the arguably the first 3D sculpture, which is generated by computer and a human. And he's doing this in 1960s,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
I
and
mean,
then now we get to see it, like, people in New York, they'll get to see it, like
yeah,
somebody using that technique.
yeah, and half of the reason that we made the copy too is in the hopes that it can tour around so that people in other cities can have a chance to see what these things look like in person. They're really, really striking. Like, I am, of course, partial, but people whose life is sculptures and fine art, when they see these things, they're really taken by them. They're amazing sculptures, and part of that is Bob's kind of classical background. They're not just lumps of wood; they're lumps of wood that are kind of sculpted into classically human proportions, and so they're visually interesting in a weird sort of way, because again, they're meant to play with that line of, what am I looking at? Is this thing I'm looking at a human figure or not? Now, quad 2 and quad 3, and quad 1 to a lesser extent, but quad 2 and quad 3, they're fairly obviously a woman's figure, but they're abstract enough that your brain just doesn't quite know what to make of them. And so they're to my mind kind of the culmination of both his practices. And it's funny to say that about his first digital piece, but that it really combines what he was all about when he did digital work with the literal themes and kind of effects he was playing with in his traditional work. And that, you see that a lot though. Like he's constantly referencing himself. Cliffhangers is as far as I can tell, Cliffhangers is a reproduction of a drawing he did when he was 8 years old. Like, it's a sculptural representation of a drawing he made of a bunch of people hanging off of a windmill blade when he was a little kid. And
Wow,
so,
I didn't know
yeah,
that. It was not, maybe I did not read that on Google, so very
that's not
interesting.
really documented anywhere. That's I'm saying that based on having his childhood archive and having gone through it here and unpublished stuff. One of the drawings that I found in his childhood archive so closely resembles the figural arrangement on Cliffhangers. And knowing he had that drawing, that drawing is in that container because it was in his possession. It really makes me think that Cliffhangers is likely a conscious reference. I don't have any proof of that, but the figural arrangements in the two images are so similar. It makes me really think that he was referencing himself, which is a little bit like his self interviews. He had to reference himself because no one else offered the right references. And a lot of the stuff he worked on as a kid had long lasting effects. He was interested in Treasure Island and Don Quixote as a kid, and you kind of see some visual references to that stuff pop up again. As an adult, he was obsessed with ballet, and so ballet is a big influence on a lot of the work. You'll see a lot of the figures are really top heavy with a little tiny point that kind of makes contact with the ground, and it's literally a ballerina on point. And so that's a common motif you'll see again. And his work is very motif heavy, motif driven, whatever you want to call it. It very much comes back to the same themes over and over and over again, from when he's 8 to when he's 80. you know.
So, like, are you referring to the ribbon series when you refer to the ballerina concept?
Oh
The
yeah,
ballet.
there are definitely some ribbon pieces that are balletic, but I'm referring to even some of the tuxedo pieces. Some of the tuxedo work, it a single sleeve or a single leg has been brought down as a point lower than everything else in the sculpture. And if you approach a lot of the suit stuff looking for the ballerina or for the dancer in the suit figures, they're there. That's a lot of the time what the figures are meant to sort of be representative of as dancers. And then in his plotter work, there's a series called Suits that's just black, what's called a drunk's walk line. So a line, as it approaches a certain boundary, the line has a greater and greater and greater chance of curving away. And so you end up with these sort of loosely but finitely bound jumbles of lines. And if you look at them, they're his resin suits, but rendered by a plotter. And they do the same sort of play with, like, are those legs, are those arms? And again, just the same, coming back to the same motifs again and again and again. He was nothing if not consistent, which is funny to say about somebody so varied.
Also, when you say that, when you were like talking about his art and how he interpreted it and how you are interpreting it, he talks about art as some kind of, in his own words, like art is some kind of an illusionary projection where a scene will be moving choreographically, synchronized with music. Up there in the space, real solid forms and jet transparent ghostly forms will come and go, materialize and evaporate. Clouds of artists will be sculpted with colored mystic gases. Like, it's also mystical, and there's this mention of music, dance, choreography there, in like being there in the space, being opaque, being formless, and then yet having structure. I mean, it kind of all makes sense, right? It kind of like all ties up to this theme of what Robert Mallary really is. That's
Yeah, and
amazing. Like,
absolutely. Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna say the super medium is what he called that. The idea of every medium being kind of brought together into a perfect union. And what's kind of interesting about a world, and because he was saying all this was in the mid 90s that he really got on to talking about the super medium so much. And he's saying this in the context of pop art and trash art and assemblage art and digital art and traditional art and dance and song and spoken word. And so you get to a point when what he's talking about with the super medium isn't even art anymore, it's just reality. He's almost describing the recording of the physical world and the representation of it as art, metaverse as art, as it were. And yeah, he was very, very conscious of the fact that we were heading towards a world where you would have immersive realities. He actually, it's interesting, he described, I think he even proposed calling it the Mallary test. I'll have to look back again and see before I go there. But the idea that you had achieved a certain threshold when you could create a reality that you couldn't tell from reality. So like the Turing test is, you can't tell this computer from a person. That test was, can you tell that this simulated reality is not reality? And if you can't, then what's the difference? Except in that reality, you have the ability to summon any media, any motion, any light or sound or color to create art way beyond anything we can currently imagine. And he was kind of already there, thinking about what that might eventually look like. That's kind of what his some of his light sculpture is meant to evoke, what he imagined super medium art might look like. And there's stereograms. So, you cross your eyes when looking at one of these images, or you put it into a reader, and there are these three-dimensional diffuse clouds of light. I've actually done a little bit of that work myself with a long exposure 3D camera, and you can do some really cool stuff. And it's meant to be sort of evocative of where he saw everything going. That actually got that idea from a student of his who I've spoken to a little bit on the subject. It's really cool work, and I haven't really seen it done otherwise, so which is surprising to me because it is so visually interesting. We've got a lot of that stuff too, so I'm looking forward to sharing more of that because that's largely unpublished, all the 3D light sculpture stuff. And literally, it's just him dancing around in front of a long exposure 3D camera with a flashlight and a bouquet of flowers, kind of dancing the flashlight off the flowers. Yeah.
Which is so
it's cool stuff.
interesting. Because when you say these things aloud, like you could like refer to two things. One is the future, that is the metaverse and alternate like virtual reality, and you know, just living digitally and just like creating, like you creating your own universe. And it would also like refer to spiritualism. I mean, I don't know, like of course, like he has said that he's very Catholic. He's kind of dabbled in like his themes run around existentialism and you know the Cold War, and you know the way so it kind of all ties together. He just blows my mind away because I've seen some of his like the stereoscopic art where he's kind of like dancing like in the start of the video, and it's just visually it's just so interesting. Like all of his work, like it's so interesting to look at, and you have some of that. I mean, that just brings me to kind of the question, like of course, like what are you, like tell us, like what are you doing with his art now? Like now you have got this, and like what's next?
Yeah, that's been the big question. So it's been about a year and a half, a little more now, that we've been in possession of this stuff. We've spent a lot of time scanning, cataloging, doing research trips. My creative director went to Mexico City to try to hunt down prints there, with some success. He found some interesting material there. You know, and interviewing family members, surviving colleagues, working on books, short films. We've got a feature film we're working on that'll be a sort of a mix of a biopic of Bob and a story of what we've been working on, because it's an interesting story. You know, I think of what our position in this story as most similar to that of Joe Bonger, the inheritor of Van Gogh's estate after his brother passed away. So when Vincent van Gogh died, he left 100% of his work to his brother, who was the only person who had ever bought a piece from him. So when his brother passed away shortly thereafter, he left everything to his wife. And his wife's really the reason we know so much about him is because she popularized the story of him cutting his ear off and his painting through the asylum window, and sort of this romantic vision of him, which, in the same way that with Mallary, you don't really have to exaggerate to create a fairly romantic story of Mallary. He was the Forrest Gump of 20th century American art. He's just always in the room. He's friends with Rauschenberg and the de Koonings, and he's showing at the Whitney, and he's kind of one of the more interesting characters of 20th century art that hasn't had a movie made about him, or hasn't really been treated in media extensively. And so, you know, I kind of view it as a similar situation where Joe Bonger was in possession of this huge body of work, and a very interesting artist and figure for whom the narrative really hadn't been made yet. And so I think we've got a real opportunity here to really just remind people. We don't have to create a narrative around Bob. The narrative is there. You know, we just have to kind of bring all this stuff back to light, publish the work. And so, you know, like I said, we got a lot of what we call Mallary Media or Mallary Projects. It's kind of the overarching umbrella, but that is us producing new media. So 2 weeks from now, we've got a book coming out that will mint as an NFT. Almost everything that we do will be tokenized to some degree or another. I am a big believer in low price, high supply. So you're going to see a lot of open editions, a lot of $8 accessible stuff. We will eventually be tokenizing the work itself. I say eventually, sooner rather than later. That's coming very soon. The tokenization of the actual original pieces. To that end, we got a beast of a scanner. The scanner, we got these things. So every single image is about a sixth of a gigabyte. So they're really incredible scans. You can get down and see like the fiber of the papers, and the colors are beautiful. And like I said, the condition is spectacular. So, and the vast majority of this work has never been published. It's kind of, when you read about the early history of American generative art, a lot of what you're reading about is, in my subjective opinion, artists producing less aesthetic stuff after Bob had been working for years, and so from both a kind of aesthetic appreciation standpoint, from a historicity standpoint, he was the first digital art professor in America too. So part of what we're hoping to do is try to track down the genealogy of, or the memology, the mimetic genealogy, as it were, of his contributions to American digital art. Like, did the people that he taught go on to teach other people who went on to teach other people? Like, how much of a echo effect did his academic career have? Because a lot of the work that he produced early on seems to have pretty clear echoes in the generative art of today. There's a lot of stuff being made today that seems to echo Bob's work, being made by American artists, that seems to echo Bob's work, but we don't really know. So that's a big object of academic interest. And so we're kind of just trying to attack it every way we can find, so I'm trying to generate academic interest. I'm trying to generate interest in Web3. And then we're also trying to generate interest amongst prominent institutions and collectors for whom Bob is thought of as a trash and assemblage artist. So like I said, a lot of prominent museums have Bob's work, but it's the trash and assemblage stuff. And so it's kind of about going to people who have, a lot of people in the traditional art world have heard of Bob. He's not a household name in the wider sense, but he's a very well-known figure in late 20th century American art, or mid 20th century American art, rather. And so it's just kind of about reminding people, showing them all this stuff that they've never seen. And I think that's a big part of why you don't see Bob in the position he should be. It's just because the work was never published. And so, if a tree falls in the woods, how influential can an artist be if the work is never published? And so just getting a lot of this stuff out there. And it's not that he didn't want to publish it, it's that there was zero interest in plotters at that time. Like I said earlier, the narrative really was like, oh, Bob was this wonderful artist, but he quit. Now he just plays with computers. Like, they didn't even think of what he was doing as art at that time. And so he was too early, and being too early is indistinguishable from being wrong.
It's so interesting that people were not interested in what he was doing after he left like his junk art era. And I think he kind of understood that people are not gonna understand what he's trying to do. And I think that's why he kind of documented everything, and he was like waiting to be found like by the right person.
Mm-hmm.
And now that, because I followed you on Twitter, and now kind of, because of course, like, you cannot get the sense of a person just by texting them on Twitter or just by listening them to spaces, but then you still can get a fair idea about like just the glimpse of the, and I think you're the perfect person because you want to cook everything like at once, like in a big kitchen, and you kind of juggle everything, and like you're attacking Robert Mallary's art like in every possible way, like you're tackling it, like the book is coming, the movie is coming, you're tokenizing it, you're getting you're commissioning quads to be created so that you're doing art exhibitions, just you are, and as you said right now, like you are doing, you're trying to find genealogy of Robert Mallary's teachings and Shrimto, like, and this is amazing. Like, I mean, who are you? Like, what are you? I mean,
Well, and so my original background was as a gallery artist, but for about 6 years before getting into this space, I ran a rehab hospital. So in 2016, my dad passed away, and he ran a hospital, and he owned a hospital. I had to take over, and
sorry to
so
hear
I
that.
Oh, I appreciate it. And so, and it was a business I had tried to stay out of. It was the family business since I was a kid. I consciously didn't go into that field, but I had grown up around it, and I had a business degree, and so I was not totally unprepared to do that. But it's a high pressure, high stakes, go business. Like, if you screw around too much, people have really negative outcomes, and it affects them for the rest of their lives. We were doing physical rehab. That was the type of hospital. And it really can have hugely negative consequences for people if you have a bad outcome. And so I feel like I kind of am maybe bringing that sort of same severity into what I'm doing now, where I'm like, no, I have to get this right. And also, it just feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity. Like, I'm not about to find another shipping container full of amazing art. This is, I'm only going to get one shot at this. I only get one bite at the apple. I've got to do it right. And I take my responsibility really seriously. Just as a big fan of Bob's now, I've been so immersed in his work. I really have become a huge fan of his work, and I take that responsibility seriously. But also, I mean, the potential economic rewards of doing what Joe Bonger did with Van Gogh, and really bringing an artist back into the public light when you kind of control the body of work, can be a tremendously lucrative thing if you do it right. So it's just kind of a perfect storm of passion and financial incentives to make me really go after this. And so it's been a pretty amazing experience, though. Really remarkable.
This is crazy. Like, of course, I should not ask this, but like, how much money are we looking at? Like, just
Oh, well, I mean, and that's the thing, is it's such a wide potential range. It's a lot of plotters. It's a lot of plotters, and the plotter market has gotten pretty good. A few years ago, there was really no market for plotters to speak of. Even really big names were selling for high four figures if you were lucky. Vera Molnar plotters now sell for 35 grand. We're not quite there yet, but I don't think there's really any reason that Bob's work shouldn't trade at a similar level eventually. So it's potentially a pretty great haul. And I'm a big believer in the idea that I could just if I had just stuck a heavy lock on that container on the day it arrived and just reopened it 10 years later, I probably would have done fine, because I think gen art in writ large is going to go on a very upward ascent from here. Like, I think we're just seeing the very beginnings of a vintage gen art market maturing, and that prices have a long way to go. That in a weird way, NFT gen art prices, I think, are predicting what we're going to see in physical gen art eventually. That they're just kind of front running because they're so easy to trade. They're so liquid.
yeah,
The artists are still alive. They're still engaged. And so it was very easy for the digital gen art to go for a run. And now the physical gen art, I think, is going to basically recapitulate that. And we're going to see stuff really go crazy over the next few years. And so part of me is tempted to just zip it, lock it up, hide the key, and come back in 10 years. But
and sleep
yeah,
and sleep
it's
over it.
yeah. But at the same time, I feel like there's an opportunity right now, because we are so early in the history of like gen art being taken seriously, that it's almost, so there's this phenomenon called founder's effect. If you go to certain little towns in New England, you'll go to a town and everybody in this town is really tall, and everybody in this town has big ears, and and it's because some person who was there in the beginning was really tall or had big ears, and everybody is their descendant in this little town, right?
Mm.
And I feel like there's something kind of similar happens in an emerging market, that if Bob Mallary is a visible big part of this early surge in gen art, then he will always be a part of the history of gen art in a way he wouldn't be if I just threw a lock on the thing and came back in 10 years. That would be a good outcome, but that there's a real opportunity here to put Bob's imprint on a disproportionately large swath of the gen art kind of zeitgeist. And so again, hence part of why I'm so not frenzied about it, but why I have so many fires going at once is that it feels like there's a limited window to really kind of dominate the mind share around generative art, and we're kind of in that right now.
And he deserves it.
Oh, he does, doesn't he? And that's the thing too. Yeah, I feel I've said this before in other contexts before. I could never be a salesman of something that I didn't believe in, because I'm a terrible liar. Like I cannot look somebody in the eye and tell them that something bad is good. And so I'm very blessed with Bob's work, because it's like very easy for me to be excited about it and share it with people, because it's real. There's substance there. It's like a genuinely historically significant collection. And it's funny because we're in a space, especially in Web3. This is true of all art, though. This is not just Web3, but all art. It's this ocean of bullshit artists, of people who make a career of taking something mediocre and saying, look at this spectacular thing. And so when somebody really finds something spectacular, it's kind of hard to get out of that skeptical mode, right? And so I find that's a big struggle, is that when I describe this to people, especially early on, now that I've produced video evidence, and I've had a few academics out and I've kind of made some headway. But early on, when I would tell people about this, like half the people were like, yeah, right, whatever, okay. Because it's too good to be true, but it is. Like, and it just keeps proving to be too good to be true, kind of over and over again. And so part of me is waiting to wake up. Like, it just doesn't seem like this doesn't happen. It's not
in real life.
It's not the sort of thing that really happens. Yeah, it doesn't happen in real life. And so
like,
yeah,
it doesn't happen in real life that I'm talking to a person who lives in Texas, and he's an NFT whale, and this is true. Like, Web3 is too good to be true. Like,
Oh, yes.
I mean, this is just so amazing. Like, the times we are living in right now, I don't know how, like, what distance kind of is between us, and then we're talking about an artist, an underappreciated artist who's like, and I know that the Mallary era is coming, and I'm very fortunate to talk to you about this, because we are very early. Like yesterday only, I think 11 hours ago, Fidenza 545 was sold for 625 ETH. I mean, how much money is that? Like, what money is that? And how, and like, it's just, I'm just blown away, and I'm very lucky to kind of talk to you about Robert Mallary, because I kind of know that you're going to be very rich, and
I
maybe
appreciate it.
not talk to like small podcasters like me, but this is huge.
Oh no, I could talk about Mallary all day. Like, honestly, if that could become my entire job, is just talking about Robert Mallary, I'd be perfectly happy.
You could start a podcast and like talk about Robert Mallary, or you could like come again on my podcast and talk about him. But
oh yeah,
we would
anytime,
love that.
anytime. Yeah, anytime. And I need to get back to doing regularly scheduled spaces. I've been kind of just doing spaces whenever it strikes me lately, but having them on a schedule, I think, really helps. But it's hard, and this is a tricky time to be on a strict schedule, because I do have so many different irons in the fire. Or spinning plates might be the better analogy, that I have to kind of run and spin this one and run over and spin this one. So it's hard to do scheduled spaces right now, but I'm going to try to start doing that before too long. I used to do a Thursday space where I would interview artists, and I always enjoyed that. We'd pick a subject, and then I'd just have 3 artists from that genre on to kind of mostly talk to each other. I always enjoyed getting multiple artists who had never really met, who do the same thing ostensibly together, just to let them talk shop. That was always fun. Yeah, plenty to talk about nowadays, that's for sure.
I can help you with just scheduling up a space for Robert Mallary. Like I would definitely join it and listen, and kind of, because I don't know, like I've never been so interested in an artist like that, because he's just everywhere. Like he's in every medium. He's just explaining. He's very vocal. Like what's not that like about him? And then the movie's coming out, the book is coming out. There's so much to talk about. Like whenever you're gonna do space, like of course, like there's this time zone difference, but I would definitely want to listen to it and kind of witness it all. Like yeah.
And I've always tried to do some spaces in quote unquote the middle of the night. It's always funny. I'll get DMs from Americans afterwards being like, "Why are you doing spaces in the middle of the night?" I'm like, "It's not the middle of the night everywhere, guys." But
like there are people outside of America.
Like 80% of people are not in this hemisphere. It's not that populated of a hemisphere. But yeah, I get DMs anytime I do a nighttime space. I get DMs from people. "Why are you doing spaces in the middle of the night?" Like, calm down. Same thing with the Schmryptomon though. When I do the nighttime Schmryptomon mints, I get the same messages. But yeah, the spaces have been so transformative for just being able to get a signal out there. It's funny though. When I would talk about Chex, my spaces would be like 1,500 people. Chex is such an engagement.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, those spaces were huge. And then I'll do a space about Mallary, and I'll have 50 people on a good day. It's kind of funny how, well, like you said, we're early. It's such a cliche, but like yeah, people still aren't quite hip to it. I hope that changes soon. I'm trying to change it. And we had that first Mallary mint. That was exciting. It's always a little scary because it's both that it's a medium I've never minted in before. I've never minted a film before. I've never produced a film before. That was my first film I ever produced. And it's also my passion project. So it was kind of scary putting it out there, but the reception was great. And we minted 2,153 units. So very, very happy to see that. And we'll have some burn mechanics for that.
Yeah, I got
that's
some
great.
of it.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Like, yeah, I have to get this. And the whole concept of doing the $8 open editions, I mean, I think it's fantastic because not everybody has like 100 ETH in their wallets all the time. And
yeah, exactly. And I feel like it's so funny. I don't know. I think the whole ethos of NFTs in a lot of ways is broken. Like it's great as a speculative instrument. If you just want to gamble on PFPs, the system works, but ultimately a project
I have lost more money than I've made. I mean, I don't know how, like, I don't know how, like, and then I kind of stopped because I just thought that maybe I'm not a good flipper. I'm a good, how do you call it? I'm a good community member though, because of all the earliest OG projects that I still hold. Like I've met incredible people, and that's the utility for me, and that's okay. Like I lost like a lot of money, but
yeah. So I think that's 90% of people though. Like honestly, like I really think if I may have to do a poll. Have you made or lost money in NFTs? Because I feel like it's probably 80 to 90% of people have lost money overall. You see a few big winners. That's the thing too, is it's a little bit like social media, how the most popular social media accounts look like they're really killing it at life, and they just have all this amplification, so everybody feels like their life is not that great compared to I feel like NFTs are kind of the same way, in that you get a lot of signal amplification when you're doing well. Like when I had that great trade on Chex, when I minted all those checks for nothing, everybody wanted me to be on podcasts and to talk and to, like, it was suddenly really easy to get a signal out there just because I had just had a great trade, and so the space sends this very artificial signal that everybody is killing it but you. And I think really, I don't know, honestly, off the top of my head, I don't know really much of anybody who is not down from late 21, early 22. Like from that time on, almost everybody is net down. There's a few exceptions to that, but almost everybody is net down from then. And that's, that's a market cycle. That's kind of the nature of market cycles. A rising tide lifts and falling tide drops. But yeah, it's a rough business. And to my mind, it's not productive to pursue ever increasing floor prices. Like, that's part of why I'm so big on OEs and OEs and more OEs and more OEs, is because it's not about creating something that has a scarce supply and then trying to sell that to the next guy for more. Like, how do you build a community like that? Eventually people are going to get burned, and then that's your community. It's all these people who just got burned. And I feel like we've seen that with a lot of PFP projects. Like, a lot of PFP projects that people were really excited about peaked, and now the mood has changed because everybody's down. I mean, we saw it with checks for a little bit there. When checks got so peaky and then backed off hard, a lot of people got kind of sour about it. Now they're happy again, but it affects mood severely. And so I always try to mint and mint and mint and mint because the idea is not, how can we get the floor price of this thing to go up, but how can we maintain interest at $8 for an ever growing number of people? That to me is more interesting, I think. And it's not of interest to the speculators and the flippers. No, they don't particularly like that approach, but I think it's of interest to collectors and appreciators and people who actually want to enjoy a community. And we'll see. It's early days yet, and it's a pretty radical approach. Because I've done 60 burn redeems and open editions in the last 2 months, so about one a day on average, and that's pretty atypical. I have people message me and be like, "Dude, well, if you would stop minting for 5 minutes, the prices could go up." And I go, "Yeah, I know. That's you're not listening if you think that's my goal." and ultimately, I hate even saying it because it sounds a little bit like I'm saying expect it, don't expect it. But I do think that building something genuine is ultimately what causes long-term price appreciation. Like, maybe stuff doesn't pump in the short term when you approach it like this, but when you build a real community, that's when people start vaulting stuff and you start seeing like real interesting trading patterns and trait appreciation and all the things that make collectibles interesting. We'll see. It's all very experimental.
I think the whole space is like, if you say that something's very experimental, like, I think we should say this about the whole Web3 space. It's so new. People do not know about it. Like, what's a blockchain? What's a MetaMask? And like, how do crypto work? Like what even like is Bitcoin and like its true value? Like, everything is just so experimental. And I just wanted to ask, like, what are you gonna do with the 2153 mints, like 2153 mints? It's like the genesis of Robert Mallary, right? The Mallary Project, the Mallary Archive. So like, there's gonna be a burn mechanism, and like what's going on with that?
So for instance, in 2 weeks we've got a book coming out on Bob, and there will be an open edition version of the.
We'll get the physical books or the digital books, or like...
That will be part of it eventually. Yes, we have physicals that are being produced, and now when I say these are not big books, a booklet might be more appropriate. This is not. We have the full length, so we have a sort of glossy museum style 60,000 word book that's in production still. And then what we're releasing in 2 weeks is actually a book that we originally produced for the Calvi Institute of Theoretical Physics. Did a fundraising event that Quad was at. And so we produced that booklet to kind of explain who Bob was and what Quad is. And it got rave reviews, and frankly, I'm really happy with it. And I think it's a great explainer, you know, and ultimately that's about everything we're producing is just about explaining Bob to people. And so there'll be two versions of that book. There'll be an open edition version and there'll be a burn redeem version. That'll be an early burn redeem. I've got a particular piece in mind for doing a burn redeem. I don't want to commit to it, but probably by the end of this week, we'll do the first burn redeem for an editioned art piece with the film. But ultimately too, you know, I want to do burn mechanics for it, but I don't want to burn the supply down to nothing. You know, I like the idea of that film existing in a lot of wallets. And so I think a lot of projects come at burn redeems like, oh, how are we going to get the supply down on this thing to drive the price? And I don't think that's the appropriate use for a burn mechanic. I think a burn mechanic can make for a very cool engagement, like, oh, you have this thing, and so now you have exclusive access to this other thing. That's just cool. It just feels neat to be able to have access to something because you were early, you know. But as far as driving supply down as a means of manipulating price, that I always feel like is kind of a losing game, because when you start bringing the supply down, you're also losing network effect. You know, that's fewer and fewer people who hold the thing and can go, hey, you have one of those, I have one of those too. Like, you know, as we've seen, the community driving qualities of NFTs, those are amplified by numbers. And so that's why I'm really a supply maxi at the end of the day at heart. It's because I think that, yes, price equals demand divided by supply, but we are in this unusual situation where high supply can drive demand through network effect and community and all of these things that are kind of uniquely viable with NFTs. So, you know, I always want to be careful of giving the impression that I'm going to introduce burn mechanics and we're going to burn these down till there's none left. Like, no, that's not really the point, but there will be burn mechanics. Yeah, for sure. Here and there, you know, that's another thing. So yeah. And I think there's such a thing in NFTs as sort of useful mystery. I think there's abusive mystery, like what Goblin Town did, and being like, oh, who are our founders? Could they be someone famous? Maybe it's Yuga. Like, I don't like that. That form of mystery, I think, is kind of exploitative. But the mystery of knowing that something has burn mechanics, but not really knowing what those burns are going to be and what you're going to get. And I don't know, I've always found that kind of engaging. And I've done polling on that on Twitter. I've asked people, like, do you want to know what you're going to get when you burn things? And no, they really don't. It's kind of was a shock to me. Because, you know, you would think people would want to know, because they're making economic decisions, you know, and you generally want to make economic decisions with as much information as possible. But they're not.
In Web3.
No, not in Web3. People love diving in the mystery. You know, I think we saw that with the pre-sale mania, that was really what was at the root of the pre-sale mania, is that people prefer mystery. And so if you tell them, hey, send me an ether and I'll send you 1 million tokens, you end up getting less ether than if you say, send me $1 million, send me $1 million, send me an ether and I'll send you, I don't know, you'll see. And that generates more sales, weirdly enough, because people, they love the mystery. It's definitely gambling. You know, there's a gambling component to it. It scratches a similar sort of itch in the brain as gambling, I believe.
I just never thought that, I kind of say it like a lot. Like, I never thought that I had that gambler part in me, but I do have. And it's very interesting to see the way I kind of, you know, played in NFTs. Like, a lot of people want to gamble, and I think NFTs kind of provide a sort of entertainment. This is real money with like real people, but apparently we kind of send ETH to you get nothing.eth and we're happy. Like, the whole space, it just blows my mind. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I saw on Twitter a former casino manager chimed in on it, and he said something to the effect of that in the casino business, they're aware of a certain type of gambler who doesn't like it unless it feels really likely that they're going to lose. That it really needs to feel like you're going to lose because you don't get the rush otherwise. That winning doesn't produce the same dopamine effect unless you really feel like you're not going to win, and then winning, it's really a rush. And so they've kind of subconsciously learned to make ultra high risk plays because that's how they get the biggest dopamine hit. I ended up running a physical rehab hospital, but growing up, what my family ran was behavioral rehab hospitals. And a lot of that is addiction. And it was a primary specialization of most of our facilities was addiction. And gambling is legit. Like, it is a powerful, powerful, powerful set of triggers in the brain. And you definitely see it in NFTs. No doubt about it. And I generally, I want to try to avoid in most everything I do, like straight up gambling mechanisms, the like, oh, scratch this and see what you got, which I think underlies a lot of PFP collections. You know, minting the mystery PFP and then seeing what you got. That's 100% a slot machine pull. Like, it's the same mechanics, the same reward loop. And I want to avoid that as best as possible. But I do think that, yeah, there are interesting ways you can use ambiguity without it necessarily becoming a slot machine pull. And I like not telling people what I'm going to do ahead of time, because I feel like, so with the film, for instance, if I said there will be 4 1-to-1 burn mechanics with the film, then a whole bunch of people would buy 5 and they would just wait with their 5. And once those burn mechanics were done, and, you know, there'd be people who'd buy 10 and they would try to sell all 5 right at the end. And like, it encourages a lot of weird kind of non-collector-y behavior, you know? And so I like to be kind of ambiguous about what I'm going to do. Also, then if you're ever delayed with something, nobody knows.
Yeah. I kind of nobody knows, like they're not like getting like what the founder promised, like because they don't, you just never know. Like I love that.
Yeah, early
Oh,
on, I
that's
kind of,
for this. Yeah, this crazy ride. I mean, it's going to be crazy. I'm very fortunate to like have to look like, I'm very fortunate that I've researched Mallary, and now I'm like, this is gonna be like, I'm going to witness something very crazy. It could go either way, like, because of course, like in real world, you just never know, right?
oh yeah, yeah. I live in tornado country, so maybe a tornado sucks me up tomorrow. But
Oh no, don't say that. But of course, like Robert Mallary has kind of done his sales pitch himself. Like that's what I feel after, even after talking to you, that he has done all that work, and he's just got that, you know, he has that substance and everything, and now he's like got the best person to like get it out. And he's
I appreciate it.
trying to get it out like in every way possible. I think you're doing a great job at this. It was very informative to talk to you about Mallary, and just I really really appreciate this.
Oh,
I'm going to
absolutely.
be, yeah, I'm going to be there and like get some OEs and stuff like that, and then just stand there and appreciate you like doing this amazing work. Like it's amazing.
I appreciate it. Yeah, it's been an amazing experience, and not something I ever could have foreseen doing. You know, it's not the sort of thing you can plan for. I say that, but you know, it's funny. I went to college to get a business degree. Uh, I did so at a computer science school, and I spent all my time in the art department. And it seemed like a really random combination until I got into this business, and I was like, "Oh, okay, that's what I was preparing for."
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. The
uh,
way Steve Jobs say, connecting the dots, like in hindsight.
yeah, it was a
Yeah.
business degree from a computer school in the art department. It was definitely just the thing for this, and it's been a lot of fun. I mean, really, like, NFTs in general are the first thing I've ever done that felt like a calling, and
Yeah.
this collection in particular is the first thing that's like, oh, and specifically, this is what I'm working on for many, many years. Like, I mean, I could honestly spend 20 years processing and selling this collection. I mean, hell, if I sold 3 pieces a week, it would take me decades, and that's a pretty good pace. It's funny,
That's
at one
what
time
was
during.
like, sorry. That was I was thinking, like, Schmrypto is going to spend a minimum of 2 to 3 decades just being involved in this project. Like, his entire life is going to be this project.
Yeah, I mean, it really, that's kind of where I'm at with it. I came into it thinking it would be a year or two to get everything sorted, find buyers for everything. And this is when I imagined a few hundred pieces and an incomplete record. But it's not unique. It's not a unique situation. This has happened in the past, but it's maybe happened a half a dozen times. So it's a 1 in a billion opportunity, and I can't ignore it, and I can't half-ass it. Like, I've got to really go all in and get the production value on everything to where Bob would deserve it to be, because it's one chance to make a first impression. That's one. I think I'm almost kind of fortunate in that Bob is so forgotten by the general public that really, that when they hear about Bob from me, it'll be the first time for 99% of people that they ever hear about him. And I think in a way that's kind of fortunate. There's not a lot of preconceived notions. There's not a lot of bad media or questionable stuff. That's another thing too that's very nice about Bob, though, is like, he is a white male American from 1917 who had no inkling of sexism or racism, or he loved everybody. So, like, it's weird to find a male artist from that period who didn't have a bunch of really fucking problematic opinions about everything. And he doesn't. He was very progressive, very socially conscious. He was a card carrying communist, which is really where his first work appears, is in communist journals. But he is the most like suit and tie communist you ever heard of. It's such a weird vibe
Combination,
yeah. And
maybe I relate, like, I can kind of, I like him because I shouldn't say this a lot, but I kind of feel that, of course, I do not support communists, but like the ideas that they have, it just makes sense, right? Like, I kind of sympathize with them. I kind of understand some of the logics, and the way you said that he was just non-problematic, which is very, for an artist who kind of thinks so deeply, it's very difficult, because we see a lot of artists and they just have, and Bob has like strong opinions, right? And he is not shy to say them. He's just a weird combination, just like his art, like just like his art.
It is. Yeah, and he reads more. Reading Bob's writing reads more like reading somebody from today than anyone else in that period. Like, it really is strange how contemporary he is in his delivery, in his opinions, in so much of who he is. He's very, very ahead of his time in just almost every regard. And that's very fortunate. There's a lot of artists from that period who somebody would find something where I'd have to, oh, yeah, they did this or they did that. No, Bob was just a all around good guy, seemingly. I'm sure there are some people who are going to balk at him having been a communist, but again, suit and tie communist. He wasn't a eat the rich communist. I think he just thought everybody deserved a meal and a place to live.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, well, and it's funny, I call him I think he was a communist in the context of the 1950s. I think now he would be seen as, just a fairly left of center liberal, really. And in some ways, in other ways not, he he was an interesting guy. He was a complex person. That's the thing, is it's very hard to just like put him in any one bucket. He was a complicated dude. And just, yeah, such an interesting arc, and just close with a lot of prominent people. I mean, Wayne Thiebaud considered Bob to be sort of his mentor and inspiration. They were best friends. Wayne named his daughter after Bob. Mallary Thiebaud is Wayne's daughter. Rauschenberg he was close with. Sakaros he was close with. The de Koonings, he had a multi-year affair with Elaine de Kooning that everyone was aware of. It wasn't a sneaky thing. He was just had a very, very, very interesting life. And in some ways it's a little tragic, you know, because he was so close. He flew so close to the sun. He was really there in the Pantheon. He was wining and dining with the Rockefellers and being shown at the Whitney, and really kind of reached the pinnacle. And then by the time he died, had just been completely forgotten, you know. And so that's part of why his kids are so excited about what we're doing, is because to their mind it was this huge injustice, rightfully. And you know, I agree, it was a huge injustice. And so they're excited to see him, you know, having a shot at being brought back into the light. And it's an almost a unique situation too, because like with Joe Bonger and Van Gogh, she had 100% of his work. Whereas in Bob's case, if I can get the public interested in Bob again, there are 30 museums that just have to bring their work out. You know, I don't have to get his work into a bunch of museums. I just have to give them a reason to want to put it back on display. And so he can pretty overnight have a significant presence in American art museums, just, you know, without a lot of work.
People
American
are going
and
to call
English.
him like overnight success, and people are going to call you an overnight success, but we kind of know that that's not true. Like, he has earned this, right?
Yeah,
It's definitely earned this.
Absolutely. I saw somebody refer to it as the 10-year overnight success. You know, the thing that from the outside looking in looks like it just happened instantly.
Hello.
More material, and you know, everything we film consciously and intentionally to Netflix standards. The idea being that eventually we'll be able to put stuff together into a longer piece or into a short series that can be put onto streaming services. And because I got to get Bob in front of people. I think that's the game. Because if, like you've seen, like you just have to show him to people and really like lead them to water, and then most people, when they really look into him, they go, oh my God, who is this guy? Like, how did I not know about this guy? I kind of compare him to Picasso in a lot of ways, because he was so varied and so like with Picasso could render almost photographically. Like, he could draw a photographically realistic picture and painting, and he chose not to do that. You know, he chose to render things in a cubist style or in an abstract style. And similarly with Bob could paint a perfectly realistic picture. He could draw a perfectly realistic human figure. He chose not to. He kind of chose to move into these more experimental areas. And then did so with crazy abandon and produced thousands and thousands of pieces, just like Picasso. Kind of a curmudgeon too. But it's just a fascinating story. Like, and again, I'm partial because I've been just buried in this stuff now for a year and a half. But like, I really feel like there's not an American artist with a more interesting biography or a more interesting body of work. There are plenty of that are similarly interesting bodies of work, but I don't know of an American artist who's just objectively more interesting or has a more interesting body of work. And so it's been pretty wild. I mean, it's a weird experience to kind of like slowly realize that you have your favorite artist's body of work. Because like when I acquired Bob Mallary was not my favorite artist when I acquired the stuff. Like I liked him from what I had seen, but I didn't know enough about him yet. And I can honestly say he's maybe not my favorite artist ever, but my favorite American artist, or my favorite American visual artist. You know, I would say Godfrey Reggio as a film artist is on a similar level. But as far as like visual arts, the non-filmic visual arts, Bob is on the level with absolutely anybody in my mind. And kind of realizing that you have a warehouse full of your favorite artists' art is a really weird experience. Kind of a slightly unique experience, I imagine, but it's been a lot of fun. And I had kind of an inkling. So, you know, that's the piece that I just released, the most recent OE. That was, I took a film crew with me to go check out the containers. And so that piece is a recording of us actually opening the containers for the first time and getting in there and seeing what we had. And that's a 44-second clip pared down from probably 2 hours of footage. And a lot of that will find its way into the documentary. And we've interviewed a lot of Bob's family for the documentary. I bought a red camera, like a really high-end digital camera. And it's been a lot of fun. And a weird little jaunt into a genre that was always really close to my art, but I've never practiced before. I've always loved film. I was obsessed. Well, and funnily enough, as a kid, obsessed with Godfrey Reggio. But I've always really, really been into film and had kind of gotten away from it the last few years. Well, really the last 7 years or 8 years now, since I had to take over the hospital originally, I haven't had room in my life for film in the same way I used to. And so now to get to kind of come back to it on the other side of the camera, so to speak, has been really gratifying. And we got my favorite composer's assistant to write the music for that trailer. That piece has original score. That's music that was actually written for that piece.
Wow.
Yeah. So.
The length you're going to make this whole project a success is it's humbling. Like, I have so much respect after I got to know things that you're doing for this. Of course, there's like this monetary gain, and of course, like if somebody says that I'm not doing this for the money, they're lying.
Mm-hmm.
just because when you speak about Robert Mallary, I can I get that you respect that artist so much, and so you know somebody had to do it, and now you're doing it. You should do it right, and you're doing a phenomenal job of getting the word out on Mallary. And I think the way you said it, just a matter of time, cliche, but like super early. And I am so excited to see how all of this unfolds. And this I'm getting it on a podcast, like I'm recording it, and this is super weird, and this is I'm super grateful for the opportunity to just kind of witness it. You're doing a great job, Schmrypto. Like, this is amazing. Like, I'm just blown away every second. Like, you're doing a film, you've made an original score, you took a crew, the whole story, you found the art in a shipping container. Now you have like bodies of undocumented art, and the way you said, like, his work is already in those museums, like the famous museums, and people know about him. So you don't have to like establish him as a, like, you know, like a true artist, but he's already there. And the timing, NFT art, generative art, it's popping. It's going to be on the blockchain. We can actually own it. Divine intervention. It's been amazing talking to you about this. Like, I'm very excited.
Absolutely, and I appreciate it. And it's funny. I've kind of worked in a little bit of a vacuum on this stuff. You know, I hadn't really publicly published anything Mallary related. About a month ago, I put out a little teaser GIF, or not quite a month ago, but I put out a little teaser GIF, and then this piece was really my first public, you know, debut of this stuff. And seeing the reaction to it has been really gratifying, because it's hard. I'm so biased. I've my nose to the glass for the last year and a half. Of course I think this stuff is great. But it's been nice seeing.
I am biased too. Like, I am biased too, and I don't have any relationship to this whole project. Like, I'm just a spectator, right? And then when I see this, and and of course, like when you see stuff like this happening, you're just in awe of it, and his work
I
is
appreciate
great.
it.
And from somebody who doesn't understand art that much, I'm not from an art background, although my sister is, but I've just seen her doing art, and that's it. Like, I've never read about a lot of artists, just very general information. And then I started reading on Mallary, and just kind of, I got immersed into his world, his life, and now I want to see a documentary on him. Like, when I saw that 29 or 30-minute clip on Vimeo, which is produced by Copper Gillot, I think, I just wanted more of it.
Yeah, and you know, it's funny, that documentary, I love that documentary. It's fascinating, but I feel like it almost covers one of the least interesting points in his life, you know, and that we need to cover all those different times, because he just had such a fascinating life. Like, I really think that if I do my job here correctly, Hollywood is going to want to make a movie, like a biopic about this guy. But you know what? I say that, but by the time we're there, it might be easy enough to just tell the AI, hey, make a movie about Bob Mallary. But we'll see. And to that end, you know, a lot of the stuff I have is unpublished. And so a lot of the biographical material and the notes and stuff like that is unpublished. So my hope is that by getting all that out there, the right people will see it and realize that there is a screenplay here. There's all kinds of material here for other people to dive into, and that's why I want to make as much as possible of it at CCO. You know, because I want people to just be able to feel free using it, even for profit, to just be able to feel free approaching the material and playing with it. One thing, we are going to train an LLM, so we have many thousands of pages of Bob's notes and correspondence and just everything under the sun, and hours and hours and hours of his voice recorded at different points in his life. And so I think what we're going to be able to do, and I actually had a discussion with somebody about this earlier today who I think can do it, is create a chat Bob, as it were, you know, a chat GPT that's been trained only on his writings. And so hopefully it'll be like, you'll be able to talk to Bob soon enough.
That is crazy. Like, an AI, like a Bob AI, in simple terms, in a layman language, that's what it's gonna be. Like, an AI just trained on Bob's codes and his voice, and wow.
Yeah. And, you know, he was such an enthusiastic teacher and mentor that I like to imagine that what we could create there would be an AI companion that would actually be of use to artists. An AI companion who you could be like, hey, I've got artist block on this project. Do you have any recommendations? And it would be able to give you recommendations that come from a real place of experience and authority, because we have such a huge body of his writings and of his work. And since we have the code that generated all those original pieces as well, that code can be used to create a parallel structure in the LLM. And so what I would really love eventually is to have a version of ChatBob that you can interact with and request new work from, and he'll be able to write new generative code that is as though it were written by Bob, you know, and not a reproduction of the images, but a reinterpretation of the code itself. Not like a generative, not an AI image generator, but an AI code generator that then generates images, which could be fun. And then hook that up to a plotter and just let it run 24 hours a day with a webcam pointing at it, you know?
I cannot, like, I'm not able to take it.
Right? It's too much. It's too much. Yeah.
It's just too much. And yet it just seems plausible. Like, I can see you doing it. It's just
it's so funny because yeah, the stuff that's what I really love about 2023 is that we can have these conversations that are so sci-fi, like that are just so out there, but are completely sincere in a way that I feel like never in my life has it felt as much like I'm living in a sci-fi novel as right now. Because yeah, it's all perfectly feasible. Like it shouldn't be particularly difficult even to train these models. Now, I think it would be really cool. There's some things I would love to be able to do that I think might be a little trickier. Like I think it would be really cool to train a chat Bob that used Bob's writing as the primary data set, but you sort them by year. And so you can talk to Bob at kind of different points in his life, you know? And we have recordings of his voice at those different times too. And so it would kind of sound like you're talking to old man Bob from the Copper Guyloff documentary, or you're talking to, you know, fiery young communist Bob, or and that's yeah, a lot of ideas.
Like you could just say to let's just call him Bob GPT for reference. Bob GPT, please help me choose colors for a Catholic painting that I'm doing. Or you could like you could talk to Bob, who was in the 1950s and the 1960s and 70s and 80s. What is this thing? The way we did it, like we are actually living like a sci-fi life, and you're talking about all of these things, and I'm not assuming that you are crazy, and I'm understanding it, and it's actually going to happen, and not like in the distant future, but like maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, and that's not a very it's just, and with Apple coming out with a VR headset, you know, I think a few days back, maybe yesterday or a day or two, and this is going to be so amazing. Like I'm super excited to see where you go with the Mallary stuff. Now I'm also a fan of Robert Mallary, and I actually can own a piece from him. Like I could afford to with OEs and stuff like that, or maybe I could afford like a physical piece. Like who knows? Like maybe who knows? Like I kind of earn a lot of money, and I kind of know who to contact. Like I know I have to contact Schmrypto that I want to buy something from Robert Mallary. That's so crazy. Like I cannot think that this was possible a few years ago. Like
oh yeah. I mean, the connections that NFT Twitter has made possible, you know, is really is amazing. And
yeah, I kind of joined NFT Twitter in December or November 2021, and I was a person who never used crypto. I thought crypto was used for illegal things like drugs and dark web and stuff like that. I was not in favor of. I just came into NFTs because I was in marketing in Web 2, and I just wanted to write about Web 3, and I just came here, and honestly, I've not done like a single writing because I'm so absorbed with Web3, like understanding it and kind of or whatever little money I had, investing it and just talking to people, and I thought like I should start a podcast and just talk to people, and I never knew like this was my calling, and maybe it's not, like who knows, I'm just experimenting. It's just amazing what Web3 and what tech could do, and Robert Mallary is like the perfect he's going to be star of Web3. Like, I'm very sure about that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of funny you put it that way. Yeah, I think that if we get Chat Bob just right and we instantiate him correctly and everything, he could almost be like a mascot. You know, like he can kind of talk about digital art. He was there from the beginning. You know, so if we can get a really good Chat Bob going, you're going to be able to talk to an entity that, you know, effectively participated in Gen Art from almost day one up until the end of the the 20th century, and that's, I don't know, that's really incredible. And in the game is like you said with the VR headset, to have something where either via holographic projection or via AR, you would be able to actually see Bob and interact with him, and we'll get there. That's end game for this thing, really, is to try to resurrect him in as complete a version as possible. And if every artist could have their own Bob, a Bob for every home, like the old microwave slogan. If every artist could have their little companion Bob to offer advice, and maybe he doesn't always look and sound like Bob, but like I really feel like the AI that we're going to create here is one of the first AI where I can see like a genuine use case as a companion for artists, so we'll see. And that's a complete training set.
Sorry, sorry to cut you off. I think that many artists are going to like follow your footsteps, and this is going to happen for like a lot of artists. Like if you get one Bob GPT right, there's going to be GPTs for a lot of other artists, like past artists, and a lot of new artists are also going to try and do the same, and you're going to start a new era of artist GPTs. Amazing stuff. Wow.
I'm looking forward to it. And really, I mean, it should be repeatable for anybody with a big body of written work. If you have a lot of somebody's speeches or writings, you should be able to do this for them. Like LLMs are pretty repeatable. And so, a lot of high profile artists from the 20th century and from earlier. That's the thing, is there are people who lived in the Middle Ages for whom we have extensive writings. And that's when it gets kind of interesting to me, is like Michel de Montaigne. That's an excellent example. Michel de Montaigne, I want to say lived in the early 1500s. I may be getting the date slightly wrong, but he was fairly early. And he left behind a huge quantity of very personal writings. He invented the word essay for what he did, for his obsessive practice. And so somebody like that, I think you could reasonably train an LLM to recreate Michel de Montaigne, and then suddenly you're talking to somebody from the 1500s. And it's a little bit of a simulation, like it's not real per se, but it's real enough.
It's as real as it can get.
Yeah, it's as real as it's going to get without time travel. And so I'm excited about that. I'm of the opinion that I won't really care that they're not real. They're real enough, especially if you have a big training data set. I was just talking to somebody who trained one on Jack Butcher's writings, and so they have a little Jack Butcher bot they were showing me. It was pretty good. It said some funny things. You can tell that it had pulled some stuff from other sources that were like mixed in during interviews and things, but it was pretty decent. And so, seeing stuff like that with a limited training set makes me wonder, with Bob. He was a expert pianist too, and so we'll have one that can play the piano. It'll need to be able to play the piano. Or at least produce piano music, comment on it. We have so much of his piano playing. We haven't, but I have done it in one case. So there was a little short loop produced by Everfresh, the German animator, and we used Bob's piano music cut into like an electronic loop to make the music for that one. So it's actually Bob playing the piano and his daughter talking, and so I think when we do the full length feature, most of the music from that is going to be Bob's music kind of reimagined for the film. And it's been a lot of fun. I'm, as you may have guessed, I'm enjoying myself. Like this is way up my alley. Like I love film, and so it's cool to get to kind of practice it from the other side now. And we're a 3-person team. It's a little team, like I don't have a big staff or anything.
So a team of like 5 to 10 people, or like more?
No. I'm saying 3. We have 3 people.
Oh, 3 people.
Yeah. It's yeah, it's 3, and I'm considering hiring a 4th person when they're available, but currently, yeah, I've got 2 employees, and that's what we've been doing everything with so far. We have a lot of contractors, of course. So like this most recent film was a 5-person team, a director / cinematographer, myself, my producer, an editor, and a composer for the music. And that's pretty much the team we're going to be producing all the film stuff with. So we've got a group now that knows how to talk to each other, who knows who can do what. And so the hope is as we go, we can just get better and better at this, that when we look back, I hope when we look back that trailer looks kind of rough compared to what we can do in a year's time. So, especially as AI gets better too, because I'm so open to those tools.
Definitely. It's the way Bob said that there's going to be a super medium where the reality is going to like blend into the abstract and art, and that was his vision for computer art, and you're doing all of that now, music and film and books and blockchain and OE, and then even physics, like you're actually manufacturing copies of quads so that people can actually see what a quad is, because the way you said, it's very difficult to understand what a quad is and why is it so special and stuff like that. I'm blown away by you, Schmrypto, and I really enjoyed this talk, and I did we're going at it for I think 2 hours, and I'm still blown away, and yeah, just so amazing. And I kind of I wish you a lot of luck. I wish you all the best for this massive project. I know you're going to be successful. Of course, anyone who kind of understands this would know that this is going to be life-changing for you and your team, and I think the whole art scene. This is amazing.
Well, I really appreciate it. Yeah, it's been nice to get it out there a little bit and start sharing what we've been working on. I really appreciate your response and enthusiasm for everything. That's how we get the ball rolling, is it's going to be a little group of enthusiasts early on who a lot of people are going to think are crazy, and then suddenly one day everybody's going to wonder how they missed it. I kind of hope that's how Mallary goes, is that a few months from now, people are going to look back and go, well, it was so obvious that this was going to go well. But we'll see. It's all an experiment. This whole space is so experimental. I always kind of get a kick out of people declaring that something won't work. We know what will work. We don't know what won't work yet. And so we're trying something a little different here, and I think it'll work. We'll see. One way or the other, I'm going to make people hear about Mallary. I'm determined. I'm getting his name back out there. It's just going to be a matter of what that translates to. But so far so good. I've been enjoying it.
Thank you for taking out your time and chatting Mallary with us. I'm a huge fan of Mallary now, and also Schmrypto, I'm a huge fan of you now, because
well, thank you. I appreciate it. And we should mention, yeah, you have
I've learned a lot from you.
No, I appreciate it. And I try, yeah, it's funny. My mom was a school teacher for many years, and so I'm kind of wired to want to teach. It's just part of my upbringing. And so that's part of what's been fun about this with Mallary, is just a chance to kind of teach people about him. Has been really gratifying and a lot of fun. And I feel like it's kind of like with Schmrypto, if I'm having fun, I can help other people have fun with it too. And thank you for your awesome Schmrypto. It's still a favorite, a crowd favorite. It's been fun to be back to minting those again after the gas got so crazy. I could not believe how bad gas got. It was nuts. It was in the teens today for the first time in forever. Guai was 18 earlier today. I hadn't seen that in months, but it's good timing. So